People no longer believe what they are being told. And the proof is not in a survey. It is in something you did last week that you did not even notice. Someone said the economy is doing well. Maybe it was on television. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was a headline you scrolled past. And you did not argue. You did not push back. You did not correct them. You did not engage at all. You just stopped listening. The way you stop listening to a song you have heard too many times. Not with anger, with nothing. And that nothing, that flat, empty, automatic disconnection from a statement that you once would have debated or believed or at least considered, is the most dangerous thing happening in the United States right now. Because a country that argues is a country that still cares. A country that stops listening is a country that has given up on the possibility that the truth will come from any official source. The 2026 Edelman Trust Barometer, the largest annual trust survey on Earth, found that 7 in 10 people will not trust anyone who thinks differently from them. Trust in the media dropped below 30% for the first time in Gallup's history. Congress is at 7%. The medical establishment lost 20 points of public confidence in 4 years. Corporations said they cared about their workers and then laid off 400,000 of them by email while posting record profits. And 63% of Americans rated the economy as bad, while the GDP said it was growing. The population did not just stop trusting one institution, it stopped trusting all of them. At the same time, across every income level, every education level, and every age group. And the question that nobody is asking because the answer is too uncomfortable is this. What happens to a country where 330 million people have decided that nothing they are told by anyone in authority is true, not wrong, not biased, not spin, not true? The largest annual trust survey on Earth just documented that 7 in 10 people will not trust anyone who thinks differently from them, and the CEO of the firm that published it said the world has descended from fear to polarization to grievance to something he called insularity, and there is no stage after it. On January 18, 2026, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is the largest and longest-running annual study of trust in the world, now in its 25th year, surveying over 33,000 respondents across 28 countries, released its 2026 findings. And the findings did not describe a decline. They described a retreat, a civilization pulling into itself the way an animal curls into a ball when it knows it cannot fight and cannot flee. The headline number was this: 7 in 10 respondents globally reported being unwilling or hesitant to trust someone who has different values, approaches to social issues, cultural backgrounds, or information sources from their own. 70%. In the United States, the number was exactly the global average. 70%, 7 out of every 10 Americans have concluded that if you do not think the way they think, read what they read, believe what they believe, and process the world through the same lens they use, you cannot be trusted, not disagreed with, not debated, not engaged, not trusted. And Richard Edelman, the CEO of the firm that has been tracking this number for 25 years, described the trajectory in a sentence that reads like a psychological autopsy of an entire civilization. He said over the past 5 years, we have seen a descent from fear to polarization to grievance and now to insularity. A descent. 4 stages, each one worse than the last. Fear was 2020, the pandemic, the lockdowns, the uncertainty. Polarization was 2021 and 2022. The political divisions that made family dinners feel like hostage negotiations. Grievance was 2023 and 2024. The sense that someone was to blame, and the system had failed, and the institutions had betrayed the public, and the anger needed a target. And now insularity. 2025 and 2026. The withdrawal. The retreat into smaller and smaller circles of people who already agree with you. The refusal to engage with anyone outside the bubble. Not out of anger anymore, out of exhaustion. The anger burned out. What replaced it is something quieter and more dangerous. The decision that engaging with difference is no longer worth the energy. And here is what makes insularity the terminal stage. Fear can be addressed with information. Polarization can be addressed with dialogue. Grievance can be addressed with reform. But insularity cannot be addressed at all, because the person inside the insular bubble has decided that they do not want to be reached. They have constructed a cognitive fortress made of curated feeds, selected sources, preferred commentators, and algorithmic echo chambers that confirm what they already believe and filter out everything that challenges it. And the fortress is not just comfortable, it is addictive. Because inside the fortress, you are always right. Your worldview is always validated. Your fears are always confirmed. Your enemies are always visible. And the dopamine hit of having your beliefs reinforced by a community of people who share them is neurologically identical to the dopamine hit from social media approval. The insularity is the scroll. The fortress is the feed. And 70% of the population is inside it. And the Edelman report found that only 39% of respondents get news from ideologically different sources on even a weekly basis. 61% never encounter information that challenges their existing framework. They live inside a closed information loop where every input confirms the output they already expected. And a population that lives inside closed information loops cannot function as a democracy, because democracy requires the ability to be persuaded. It requires the possibility that you are wrong. It requires the willingness to update your beliefs when confronted with evidence that contradicts them. And 70% of Americans have decided they are not willing to do that. That is not a political problem. That is a civilizational one. And there is no stage after insularity in Edelman's 5-year trajectory, because insularity is the end of the road. It is the point at which the population stops listening. And a population that stops listening cannot be governed, cannot be reformed, cannot be united, and cannot be saved from the consequences of its own refusal to engage with reality. Trust in the media dropped below 30% for the first time in the history of the Gallup poll, and the collapse means that 230 million Americans no longer share a common set of facts, and a country without shared facts is not a country but a collection of warring tribes wearing the same flag. Gallup has been asking Americans the same question since the 1970s. Do you trust mass media to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly? In the 1970s, approximately 70% of Americans said yes, the news was trusted. Walter Cronkite was the most trusted man in America. The evening broadcast was a shared national ritual. Families gathered around the same 3 channels and received the same set of facts and debated what those facts meant. They disagreed about policy. They disagreed about values. They disagreed about priorities. But they agreed about the facts. The sky was blue. The economy was growing or it was not. The war was going well or it was not. The president said what he said, and the tape confirmed it. And then the trust began to erode. Not suddenly, not because of one event, but steadily, year after year, point by point, like a patient losing blood so slowly that nobody notices until the chart shows the line approaching 0. Cable news launched in 1980 with CNN and exploded in the 1990s with Fox News and MSNBC. The business model shifted from informing a mass audience to retaining a partisan one. The metric changed from accuracy to engagement. The incentive changed from truth to confirmation. And the audience offered the choice between a channel that challenges their beliefs and a channel that validates them, chose validation, every time. And the internet accelerated the collapse by removing the gatekeepers entirely. Anyone could publish, anyone could broadcast, anyone could build an audience. And the algorithm that determined what you saw was not designed to inform you, it was designed to retain you. And retention is maximized by content that provokes an emotional response. And the emotional responses that produce the highest retention are anger, fear, outrage, and moral disgust. The algorithm fed you the content that made you angriest because angry users stay on the platform longer and see more advertisements. And the content that makes you angriest is the content that tells you the other side is lying. And when both sides are being told the other side is lying, by algorithms optimized for engagement rather than accuracy, the shared factual foundation that democracy depends on dissolves. And the Roosevelt Institute documented that after the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was closed, Gallup released a poll showing that Americans' trust in the media had reached a historic low, dipping below 30% for the first time. Below 30, from 70% in the 1970s to below 30 in 2025. A 40-point collapse in half a century. And the same Pew Research Center study found that Americans believe the news is more influenced by corporate or financial interests than by government or political interests. The public does not believe the news is being manipulated by politicians. It believes the news is being manipulated by the corporations that own the networks. And they are right. 6 companies control approximately 90% of the media Americans consume. Comcast owns NBC. Disney owns ABC. Paramount owns CBS. Fox Corporation owns Fox News. Warner Bros. Discovery owns CNN. And the advertising revenue that funds all of them depends on consumer confidence, which depends on a narrative that says the economy is growing, the system is working, and the products being advertised are worth buying. The business model of the media is structurally incompatible with telling you the truth when the truth is bad for business. And the public figured it out, not through analysis, through experience. Through watching the GDP number on the screen while their own bank account said something different. Through hearing the word growth while their credit card balance climbed. Through being told inflation was coming down while the grocery bill went up. The gap between what the media said and what their life showed them was the trust killer. Not conspiracy theories. Not misinformation. The lived experience of being told one thing by a screen and experiencing another thing in a store. And 230 million Americans, the 70% who no longer trust the media, are now getting their information from sources that the institutional media does not control. YouTube channels, podcasts, Substack newsletters, TikTok commentators, Telegram groups, and those sources are unfiltered, uncurated, and unaccountable. Some of them are brilliant, some of them are dangerous. And the consumer has no way to distinguish between the two because the institutional media that was supposed to serve as the filter destroyed its own credibility. And now the population does not share a common set of facts. Your neighbor does not read what you read. Your coworker does not watch what you watch. Your family member does not believe what you believe. And when the country faces a crisis, there is no shared information space where the facts can be established and the response can be coordinated. There is only the fortress. And inside the fortress, the crisis is always someone else's fault. Congress has a 7% confidence rating, and that number is not a political opinion. It is a structural diagnosis that means the institution, the Constitution designed to solve every problem on this list, has been rejected by 93% of the population it claims to represent. Gallup has been measuring public confidence in the United States Congress since 1973. And in 2024, the number hit 7%. 7. And that number has not recovered. It is sitting at or near 7% as you watch this video. And I need you to understand what 7% means, because the number is so low that its meaning has become abstract. People hear it and nod and move on because they have been hearing low Congress numbers for so long that the gravity of the number no longer registers. So let me make it concrete. If you put 100 Americans in a room and ask them whether they have confidence in Congress to do the right thing, 93 of them would say no. The number of people who trust Congress is statistically indistinguishable from the margin of error in most surveys, which means it is possible that the true number is 0, not 7%. 0. And the American survey published an analysis in February 2026 that placed this number in its full historical context. They wrote that public trust in American institutions peaked in the mid-20th century, and that Gallup data shows confidence in Congress, banks, and organized religion was substantially higher in the 1950s and 1960s than it is today. And then they added the detail that makes the decline structural rather than cyclical. They wrote that declining trust spans income levels, education levels, and age cohorts, suggesting a structural rather than purely partisan phenomenon. Structural, not partisan. Meaning this is not Republicans distrusting a Democratic Congress or Democrats distrusting a Republican Congress. This is everyone distrusting Congress, regardless of who controls it, regardless of who sits in the Speaker's chair, regardless of which party holds the majority. The distrust is of the institution itself, its processes, its incentives, its output, its relationship to the $4.1 billion in lobbying that walks through its doors every year. And the Edelman Trust Barometer confirmed that low-income respondents see institutions on average 18 points less competent than high-income respondents and 15 points less ethical. The people at the bottom of the economy, the 45% who cannot make ends meet, the 111 million carrying credit card balances, the families whose children are going hungry, trust the government 18 points less than the people at the top. Because the people at the bottom experience the government's output directly. They are the ones waiting 225 days for Jackson's water to be fixed. They are the ones whose LIHEP was cut. They are the ones whose SNAP work requirements were expanded to 80 hours per month with no exemptions. They are the ones standing at the gas pump, doing math that does not work while the president says the economy is growing. And the gap between what the government says and what they experience is the trust killer. Not ideology, experience. And 88 million eligible voters chose not to vote in 24. That number is not apathy. It is the behavioral expression of 7% confidence. When 93% of the population does not trust the institution, and 88 million of them refuse to participate in selecting its members, the institution has not lost its mandate. It has lost its legitimacy. And a government without legitimacy can still exercise power. It can still pass laws. It can still collect taxes. It can still wage wars. It can still imprison people. But it cannot govern, because governing requires consent. And consent requires trust, and trust is at 7%. And the debt ceiling has been raised 78 times without ever constraining spending. and the deficit is $2 trillion per year. And the interest on the debt exceeds $1 trillion, and the infrastructure is graded C-, and the students rank 41st in math, and 264,000 die of despair. And the government that is supposed to address every one of those crises is trusted by fewer people than trust a random stranger on the internet. That is not a political problem. That is the end of institutional legitimacy. And the American survey asked the question that follows from the data: if institutions no longer command trust, what fills the gap? And the answer, which is visible in every comment section, and every Telegram group, and every TikTok response video, and every podcast audience, is that the gap is being filled by individuals, influencers, commentators, podcasters, YouTube channels, people who have no credentials, no accountability, and no institutional oversight, but who are trusted more than the institutions because the institutions earned their distrust and the individuals have not. The pandemic destroyed public trust in the medical establishment so completely that a third of parents are now questioning routine childhood vaccinations that have saved millions of lives, and the consequences of that distrust will kill more people than the disease that caused it. Before 2020, trust in the medical establishment was one of the last remaining pillars of institutional confidence in the United States. Gallup's data showed that the medical system and doctors consistently ranked among the most trusted institutions and professions in the country, with confidence levels in the 70 to 80% range. People trusted their doctor. They trusted the pharmacy. They trusted the public health guidance. Not perfectly, not universally, but enough that when the CDC said take this medication or get this vaccine or follow this protocol, the majority of Americans complied because they believed the recommendation was based on science that was conducted in good faith for their benefit. And then the pandemic happened, and the trust that took decades to build was destroyed in approximately 18 months. Not by the virus, by the response. The CDC changed its guidance on masks 3 times in 14 months. First, masks were not recommended for the general public. Then cloth masks were recommended. Then cloth masks were declared insufficient, and N95 or KN95 masks were recommended. Each reversal was explained as an update based on evolving science. But the public did not hear evolving science. The public heard we were wrong, and we are hoping you will forget that we told you the opposite thing 6 months ago. And the vaccine rollout was communicated with a certainty that the data did not support. Public health officials said the vaccine would prevent infection. It did not prevent infection. It reduced severity. That is a meaningful distinction that was not communicated clearly, because the public health establishment believed that nuance would reduce compliance. And so they simplified. And the simplification was a lie. And the public caught the lie, and the trust collapsed. And Gallup documented a 20-plus point decline in trust in the medical system between 2020 and 24, from the mid-70s to the low 50s, in 4 years. A decline that normally takes a generation happened in the span of a single presidential term, and the downstream consequences are measurable and terrifying. Childhood vaccination rates in the United States have been declining since 2020. The CDC's own data shows that kindergarten vaccination rates for measles, mumps, and rubella dropped below 93% in the 2022 to 2023 school year, falling below the threshold needed for herd immunity for the first time in over a decade. And the Kaiser Family Foundation found that approximately 1 in 3 parents now expresses concerns about routine childhood vaccinations, up from approximately 1 in 5 before the pandemic. These are not fringe anti-vaccine activists. These are mainstream parents who trusted the system in 2019 and stopped trusting it in 2021 because the system lied to them about masks and oversimplified the vaccine and politicized the guidance and censored dissenting scientists and then acted surprised when the public stopped listening. And the pharmaceutical industry's role in the trust collapse cannot be separated from the pandemic response because the same industry that produced the vaccine is the industry that produced the opioid crisis. Purdue Pharma. Johnson & Johnson, McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, the companies that saturated West Virginia with 780 million pain pills and killed 700,000 Americans and paid billions in settlements while their executives avoided prison, are the same industrial complex that asked the public to trust the vaccine. And many did, and many had good outcomes. But the request for trust came from an industry that had systematically violated trust for 20 years. And the people who said no were not irrational. They were responding to a pattern of being lied to by institutions that profited from the lie. And the pattern includes the FDA, which approved OxyContin as non-addictive, which fast-tracked drugs that were later recalled, which is funded in part by user fees paid by the companies it regulates, creating a structural conflict of interest that the public may not understand technically, but senses instinctively. And the result is a country where a third of parents are questioning vaccines that prevent measles, polio, whooping cough, and diphtheria. Diseases that killed millions of children before the vaccines existed. Diseases that are now returning in pockets where vaccination rates have dropped below herd immunity thresholds. And the return of preventable childhood disease is not being caused by ignorance. It is being caused by distrust. Distrust that was earned by the institutions that now cannot understand why nobody is listening to them anymore. 63% of Americans rated the economy as bad, while GDP grew and unemployment sat at 4.3%. And that gap between the official numbers and the lived reality is not a communication problem. It is the moment the population stopped believing the numbers themselves. There is a moment in the collapse of institutional trust that is more dangerous than the loss of trust in politicians or journalists or doctors. It is the moment the population stops believing the measurements, not the policy, not the politician. The numbers. The metrics that the entire system uses to describe reality. And that moment has arrived. Consumer sentiment hit the lowest level in 46 years of data, according to the University of Michigan, and 63% of Americans rated the economy as bad in a CBS News poll, and 72% rated it as only fair or poor in a Pew survey. And those numbers exist simultaneously alongside a GDP that grew, an unemployment rate of 4.3%, a stock market near record highs, and consumer spending that is technically up. The official numbers say the economy is growing. The population says the economy is bad. Both cannot be true at the same time, and the population has concluded that it is the numbers that are lying, not the politicians who read them, the numbers themselves. And they are not entirely wrong, because the numbers were redesigned over decades to tell a specific story. The unemployment rate, U3, counts only people who are actively looking for work and have looked in the last 4 weeks. It does not count discouraged workers who stopped looking because there are no jobs. It does not count people working part-time who want full-time work. It does not count people who left the workforce entirely. U6, which includes all of those categories, runs at 7.8 to 8.1%, nearly double the headline. And the labor force participation rate has never fully recovered from the pandemic, sitting at approximately 62.5%, meaning millions of working-age Americans are simply not counted. The headline unemployment number is accurate within its narrow definition. But its narrow definition was designed to produce a number that looks better than reality. And the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, was redesigned in the early 1990s under the Boskin Commission to incorporate substitution effects, hedonic adjustments, and geometric weighting that systematically produce lower inflation readings than the pre-1994 methodology. If inflation were measured the way it was measured in 1980, according to shadow government statistics, the current rate would be approximately 6 to 8% higher than the official number. And the GDP itself counts government spending funded by borrowed money as economic growth. The $2 trillion annual deficit is injected directly into GDP. The $1 billion per day on the Iran war is counted as GDP. The $1 trillion in interest on the national debt is counted as GDP. If you remove the deficit spending from the calculation, GDP growth would be negative. The economy is not growing, it is borrowing, and the borrowing is being counted as growth. And the American consumer, who does not read shadow government statistics or understand hedonic adjustments, does not need to, because they have a more accurate measurement device than any index the Bureau of Labor Statistics produces, their own life. They know what they paid for groceries this week. They know what they paid for gas. They know what the insurance renewal said. They know what the credit card balance is. And when the television tells them the economy grew 1.6% and their own experience tells them they are falling behind, they do not conclude that they are wrong. They conclude that the number is wrong, and they are right. Not because the number is technically inaccurate within the methodology, but because the methodology was designed to produce a number that does not match their experience. And a population that stops believing the official measurements is a population that has unplugged from the shared reality that the institutional framework depends on. The GDP number is supposed to tell you how the country is doing. When 63% say the country is doing badly and the GDP says it is growing, the GDP has stopped functioning as a description of reality. It has become propaganda, and the population knows it. They cannot explain it technically, but they feel it every time the television says one thing and the register says another. And that feeling, that gap, that disconnect between the official narrative and the lived truth is the final stage of institutional trust collapse. It is the moment the population says, "I do not believe your numbers anymore." And once the numbers are not believed, there is nothing left to believe. Because the numbers were the last thing the institutions had. Corporate America spent a decade telling you they cared about you and your community and the planet, and then they laid you off by email while posting record profits, and the betrayal was so transparent that even the Edelman Trust Barometer could not hide it. For approximately 10 years, from 2015 to 24, the largest corporations in America waged the most expensive public relations campaign in the history of capitalism. It was called stakeholder capitalism, and the message was simple. We are not just here for shareholders. We are here for you, for the community, for the environment, for the workers, for the future. And the message was delivered through every conceivable channel. Super Bowl advertisements about inclusion, corporate mission statements about sustainability, ESG reports printed on recycled paper with photographs of diverse employees smiling in front of solar panels, chief diversity officers, chief sustainability officers, chief purpose officers. Titles that did not exist in 2010 and were standard by 2020, and the Business Roundtable, which represents the CEOs of the 200 largest companies in the country, published a formal statement in 2019, redefining the purpose of a corporation away from shareholder primacy toward a commitment to all stakeholders, including employees, customers, communities, and the environment. And America believed it. Briefly, and then the layoffs came, and the belief evaporated. Between 2022 and 26, the technology sector alone laid off over 400,000 workers. Google laid off 12,000 in January 2023, while reporting $76 billion in revenue. Meta laid off 11,000 and then 10,000 more, while Mark Zuckerberg's personal wealth crossed $100 billion. Amazon laid off 27,000 across 2 rounds, while reporting its most profitable quarter in company history. Microsoft laid off 10,000 while investing $10 billion in OpenAI, and the layoffs were delivered by email, not in person, not by a manager who looked you in the eye and explained the decision, by email, or by a message that appeared on your laptop screen when you tried to log in and discovered your credentials had been revoked before you were notified. And in many cases, the same companies that laid off thousands of workers simultaneously announced record profits, stock buybacks that inflated executive compensation, and AI investments that were explicitly designed to replace the workers who had just been terminated. And the public watched this happen on the same social media platforms that the corporations had used to advertise their commitment to stakeholders. The layoff announcement on LinkedIn appeared next to the ESG report on the company's website. The diversity statement was still on the careers page while the diversity officer was being walked out the building. And the Edelman Trust Barometer found something that should make every CEO in America uncomfortable. Business is now the only institution that is still seen as both competent and ethical globally. But that finding masks a fracture, because the trust is not in corporations generically. It is in individual businesses that people interact with directly. Your local mechanic, your neighborhood restaurant, the small business that knows your name, the trust in large corporations, the Fortune 500, the publicly traded companies whose stock prices depend on quarterly earnings and whose workforce is a line item to be optimized. That trust has followed the same trajectory as every other institution. And the Allianz survey found that 48% of Americans are more stressed heading into 2026 than 2025, with lack of job security as the fastest growing concern alongside healthcare costs. The workers who survived the layoffs are not grateful. They are terrified. They are sitting at their desks performing what the 2026 psychological safety study called quiet cracking, the phenomenon where employees who have not received training, development, or support in the past year are 140% more likely to report feeling job insecure. They are present, they are functioning, but they do not trust the company. They do not believe the mission statement. They do not believe the CEO's all-hands message about how the team is the company's greatest asset. Because they watched the greatest assets get laid off by email last quarter. And the betrayal of stakeholder capitalism is not just a corporate governance issue, it is a trust issue. Because when the institution that employs you, that determines your health insurance, that controls your retirement savings, that owns your professional network, and that has the power to eliminate your livelihood with a single email tells you it cares about you, and then demonstrates through its actions that it does not, the trust collapse is not abstract. It is personal. It is the boss who said you are valued and then told you your position has been eliminated, and 330 million Americans have either experienced that betrayal themselves or watched someone they know experience it. And they will never trust a corporate mission statement again. Half of American adults report feeling lonely, and the Surgeon General called it an epidemic, and the loneliness is not just destroying health, it is destroying the last form of trust that still worked, trust between human beings. Every form of institutional trust I have described in this video, trust in government, trust in media, trust in healthcare, trust in corporations, trust in economic data, is a form of vertical trust. Trust in things above you, things with power over you, things that are supposed to act in your interest but frequently do not. And vertical trust has been collapsing for decades. But there was always another form of trust that held the society together even when the institutions failed. Horizontal trust, trust between people. Trust in your neighbor, your coworker, your friend, your family member, the person sitting next to you at the barbecue, the parent standing next to you at the school pickup, the stranger who holds the door. Horizontal trust is the glue that has held every civilization together, even when the governments and institutions that govern them were corrupt, incompetent, or collapsing. Rome survived centuries of institutional decay because the local communities continued to trust each other and cooperate at the village level. Britain survived the loss of its empire because the social cohesion at the community level remained intact. And the United States survived its previous trust crises, Watergate, Vietnam, the 2008 financial crisis, because the people still trusted each other even when they did not trust the system. And that is what is different now. Horizontal trust is collapsing alongside vertical trust, and the Surgeon General's loneliness advisory is the clinical documentation of that collapse. Half of American adults report measurable loneliness, and the Edelman Trust Barometer documented that 70% of people are unwilling or hesitant to trust someone who differs from them in values, background, culture, or approach to social issues. 70% will not trust someone who is different from them. That is not a measurement of institutional distrust. That is a measurement of human distrust, person to person, face to face, neighbor to neighbor, and the political polarization that has divided the country into ideological tribes has converted what used to be disagreements into moral judgments. In the 1990s, 20% of Democrats and 17% of Republicans said they would be upset if their child married someone from the other party. By 2023, those numbers had risen to approximately 45% for Democrats and 35% for Republicans. Nearly half of one party does not want their child to marry someone from the other party. Political identity has replaced religious identity and racial identity as the primary sorting mechanism for American social life. And the sorting extends into every dimension of human connection: where you live, where you shop, what you watch, what you eat, who you befriend, who you trust. And the algorithm that curates your feed ensures that the people you interact with digitally already agree with you, which reinforces the belief that the people who disagree are not just wrong, but threatening. And the loneliness epidemic is not separate from the trust collapse. It is caused by it. You do not reach out to the neighbor because you do not know what they believe, and you are afraid that what they believe will make you uncomfortable. You do not engage with the coworker because the last time someone brought up politics at the office, the conversation ended with someone leaving the room. You do not call the friend you have not spoken to in 6 months because the gap has widened and you are not sure you share enough common ground anymore to bridge it. And the loneliness deepens. And the deepening loneliness reduces the opportunities for spontaneous trust-building interactions that are the only way horizontal trust has ever been repaired. You cannot rebuild trust with a person you never talk to. And 165 million Americans are not talking to anyone. And the silence is not just lonely. It is the sound of the last functional form of trust dissolving. Because when people stop trusting each other, there is nothing left. Not the government, not the media, not the corporations, not the numbers, and not each other. That is where the country is right now, at the bottom of the trust stack, where the last layer has cracked. When a population believes nothing and everything at the same time, it does not become skeptical. It becomes ungovernable. And the trust vacuum is being filled by voices that have no accountability, no verification, and no obligation to tell you the truth. There is a paradox at the center of the trust collapse that is more dangerous than the collapse itself. A population that has stopped trusting institutions does not become more discerning. It becomes less discerning. Because trust is a cognitive shortcut. When you trust the CDC, you do not need to read every study yourself. When you trust the newspaper, you do not need to verify every fact yourself. Trust allows you to outsource the verification to institutions that have the resources, the expertise, and the mandate to do it for you. And when trust collapses, the verification collapses with it. And the person who no longer trusts anything is not the person who verifies everything. It is the person who replaces one unverified source with another. The institutional media is replaced by a podcaster who has no fact-checkers, no editorial standards, no legal liability for inaccuracy, and no institutional memory. The doctor is replaced by a health influencer who has no medical degree, no clinical experience, no malpractice insurance, and no Hippocratic oath. The Economist is replaced by a TikTok commentator who reads one chart and extrapolates a civilization-ending conclusion that gets 4 million views because it confirms what the audience already fears. And the Edelman Trust Barometer quantified this shift with devastating precision. They found that in 2005, only 4% of Americans said a celebrity was a credible spokesperson for a company. In 2026, among the 48% who trust a food or lifestyle influencer, 62% said they would trust or consider trusting a company they currently distrust if that influencer vouched for it. From 4% to 62%. In 20 years, the credibility of a celebrity endorsement went from irrelevant to decisive. Not because celebrities became more trustworthy, because institutions became less. And Renee DiResta, one of the leading researchers on information ecosystems, analyzed the 2026 Edelman data and identified the core dynamic. She wrote that people are now expressing skepticism of anyone who believes different facts and trusts different sources, and that this is happening alongside a decline in exposure to cross-cutting information. The population is skeptical of everything outside its bubble and credulous of everything inside it. And the bubble is curated by an algorithm whose only objective is engagement, not accuracy, not balance, not public interest. Engagement. And engagement is maximized by content that confirms existing beliefs, amplifies existing fears, and validates existing grievances. And the result is a population that simultaneously believes nothing and everything. They believe nothing, the institutions say, because the institutions lied. And they believe everything their preferred sources say because those sources tell them what they want to hear. And the preferred sources have no institutional obligation to tell the truth because they are not institutions. They are individuals operating platforms with no editorial oversight, no corrections process, no fact-checking department, and no consequence for being wrong. And the trust vacuum is producing a population that is not skeptical in any rigorous sense. A skeptic demands evidence. A skeptic tests claims. A skeptic is willing to change their mind. What the trust vacuum has produced is something different. It has produced a population that has replaced institutional faith with tribal faith. The tribe's influencer is trusted absolutely. The tribe's media is consumed uncritically. The tribe's narrative is accepted without verification. And the tribe's enemies are rejected without consideration. And when a population operates on tribal faith rather than institutional trust or individual skepticism, it becomes ungovernable. Not because it is rebellious, because it has lost the shared epistemic framework that governance requires. You cannot govern a country where 70% of the people will not trust anyone who thinks differently. You cannot pass legislation that requires compromise when compromise requires trusting the person across the aisle, and 70% refuse to do that. You cannot coordinate a crisis response when the crisis itself is denied by half the population because the institutions reporting it are not trusted, and the tribal influencers say it is not real. And you cannot hold a society together with algorithms designed to pull it apart. The trust vacuum is not empty. It is full of voices that are louder, faster, more emotionally resonant, and less accountable than anything the institutional framework ever produced. And the population is listening. Not because the voices are trustworthy, because the institutions are not. Trust cannot be rebuilt from the top, because the top is the thing that broke it, and every campaign, every rebrand, every transparency initiative, and every apology tour that comes from an institution that destroyed its own credibility is just another reason not to believe them. The Edelman Trust Barometer's proposed solution to the trust crisis is something it calls trust brokering. The idea is that institutions should work through intermediaries who already have trust within specific communities. In plain language, use influencers, find someone the tribe trusts, and have that person vouch for the institution that the tribe does not trust. And on the surface, this sounds reasonable. But underneath it is the most devastating admission in the entire 25-year history of the Edelman survey. The admission that the institutions cannot reach the public directly anymore. The hospital cannot persuade you to get a vaccine. It needs a lifestyle influencer to do it. The bank cannot persuade you that your savings are safe. It needs a financial content creator to say so. The government cannot persuade you that the economy is growing. It needs a podcaster to explain why the GDP number should matter to you. The institution has become so distrusted that it must outsource its own credibility to a person who has none of the institution's resources, training, verification systems, or accountability. And the reason this cannot work as a systemic solution is that it treats the symptom rather than the disease. The disease is not that the public stopped trusting institutions because it forgot to trust them. The disease is that the institutions earned the distrust through decades of lying, failing, extracting, and betraying. The CDC earned its distrust by changing guidance 3 times and oversimplifying the vaccine. The media earned its distrust by replacing accuracy with engagement and truth with confirmation. Congress earned its 7% by spending $4.1 billion in lobbying money and raising the debt ceiling 78 times. Corporations earned their distrust by saying stakeholder capitalism and then laying off 400,000 workers by email while posting record profits. The economic data earned its distrust by counting $2 trillion in deficit spending as GDP growth, while 63% of the country said the economy was bad. And no influencer campaign can undo earned distrust because the distrust is not based on a communication failure. It is based on experience. The public experienced being lied to. They experienced the mask reversals. They experienced the layoff email. They experienced the grocery bill that contradicted the inflation number. They experienced the gas price that contradicted the energy policy. And experience is the one input that no PR campaign can override. You cannot rebrand your way out of a betrayal that the audience lived through personally. And every attempt to do so deepens the distrust because the attempt itself is perceived as manipulation. The institution that says trust us again is the institution that is asking you to forget what it did. And you do not forget, because your body remembers. Your bank account remembers. Your credit card balance remembers. The empty chair at the office where your coworker used to sit before the email arrived remembers. And so the trust stays broken. At the institutional level, and it will stay broken for a generation. Because the people who experience the betrayal will pass the distrust to their children the way previous generations passed down warnings about specific dangers. Do not trust the water. Do not trust the doctor. Do not trust the bank. Do not trust the government. And the children will absorb the distrust without having experienced the original betrayal, because the distrust will be cultural, not experiential. It will be ambient, the default setting. And institutional trust, which took 200 years to build and 50 years to destroy, will take another 200 years to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. Because rebuilding requires the institutions to change, not their messaging, their behavior, and no institution in the current American system has demonstrated the capacity or the incentive to change its behavior, because the behavior that destroyed the trust is the same behavior that generates the revenue, and revenue always wins, until the system collapses. And then trust is rebuilt, not by the old institutions, but by whatever replaces them. The only trust that still works is the kind that has no logo, no algorithm, no quarterly earnings report, and no PR department. It is the trust between two people who look each other in the eye and keep their word, and that is the only thing that can save what is left. I have walked you through the total collapse of trust in the United States. The Edelman Trust Barometer, documenting that 70% will not trust anyone who thinks differently. The media falling below 30% for the first time in Gallup's history. Congress at 7%. The medical establishment losing 20 points in 4 years. Corporate America betraying its stakeholder promises with layoff emails and record profits. The economic numbers designed to tell a story that 63% of the country knows is false. Half the population lonely. And the trust vacuum filled by tribal influencers who have no accountability and no obligation to tell the truth. That is the landscape, and it is bleak. And I am not going to tell you it is fixable at the institutional level because I do not believe that it is. Not in your lifetime, not with the current incentive structures, not with $4.1 billion in lobbying, not with algorithms optimized for engagement over truth, not with a media business model that depends on outrage, not with a healthcare system that profits from sickness, not with a government at 7% confidence that has raised the debt ceiling 78 times without ever constraining the spending that is consuming the country. The institutions are gone. Not physically. They still exist. The buildings are still there. The logos are still on the letterhead. The anchors are still on the screen. But the trust is gone. And without the trust, the institutions are shells. And shells do not protect you. But here is what I know. And here is where this video stops being about the problem and starts being about the answer. The only trust that still works in this country does not have a logo. It does not have an algorithm. It does not have a quarterly earnings report. It does not have a PR department. It is the trust between two people who look each other in the eye and keep their word. It is the neighbor who said, "I will check on you," and did. It is the coworker who said, "I will not repeat what you told me," and did not. It is the friend who said, "I will be there," and was. It is the small business owner who said, "I will fix it," and fixed it. It is the farmer who said, "This is what I grew," and it was. It is the teacher who said, "I will tell your child the truth," and did. And that form of trust, which has no institutional structure, no governance framework, no regulatory body, and no budget, is the only form of trust that has ever survived the collapse of the institutions that were supposed to protect it. Roman villages trusted each other long after the Senate was corrupt, beyond redemption. British communities trusted each other long after the Parliament failed to prevent the loss of the empire. And American neighborhoods will trust each other long after Congress's 7% confidence rating becomes a historical footnote. Because trust between human beings is not institutional, it is biological. It is the oldest social technology that the species possesses. Older than government, older than media, older than corporations, older than money. It is the handshake, the kept promise, the returned favor, the showed up when it mattered. And it cannot be algorithmed. It cannot be scaled. It cannot be disrupted. It can only be practiced. One interaction at a time, one kept word at a time, one honest answer at a time, and the practice is the answer to everything in this video. You cannot fix the Edelman number. You cannot restore Congress to 77%. You cannot make the media trustworthy. You cannot force the corporations to keep their promises. You cannot make the economic data reflect your reality. But you can be the person who tells the truth when everyone around you is performing. You can be the person who shows up when the institution does not. You can be the person whose word means something in a world where words have lost their weight. You can be the neighbor who knocks on the door, the coworker who listens without an agenda, the friend who says, "How are you?" and waits for the real answer. And every time you do that, you rebuild one unit of trust in a country that is running out of it. Not institutional trust. Something older, something stronger, something that does not require a logo or a budget or a barometer to measure it, human trust. The kind that is built face to face, hand to hand, word by word, and that is the only kind that matters now. Because the institutions had their chance, and they spent it, and what is left is you, and the person next to you, and the space between you, where trust either lives or dies based on whether you choose to tell the truth, keep your word, and show up when it matters.